Hello everyone. In the last lecture, we discussed the role of vital force in health and tried to develop an understanding about the thermodynamics of the biological systems and their relationship with vital force and human body. Now let us move forward today and discuss aphorisms 11 to 15, which deal with the role of vital force in disease. The 11th aphorism states, when a person falls ill, it is only this spiritual self-acting vital force everywhere present in this organism that is primarily deranged by the dynamic influence upon it of a morbific agent inimical to life. It is only the vital force deranged to such an abnormal state that can furnish the organism with its disagreeable sensations and incline it to the irregular processes which we call disease. For as a power invisible in itself and only cognizable by its effects on the organism, its morbid derangement only makes itself known by the manifestation of disease in the sensations and functions of those parts of the organism exposed to the senses of the observer and physician, that is, by morbid symptoms, and in no other way can it make itself known. Now in this aphorism, Hahnemann states that it is the derangement of the vital force that causes disease. Let us explore his words in detail. We have already discussed the properties of vital force in the last two aphorisms, and here he repeats some of them in saying that the vital force is self-acting and spiritual. We discussed last time that the use of word spiritual pertains to energy and has nothing to do with soul or spirit. In this aphorism, Hahnemann states one more quality of the vital force, and that is that it is present universally in our body. I'll tell you why he wrote this specific sentence, this specific word, these specific words a little later. He says further that the vital force is deranged by the dynamic influence of a morbific agent inimical to life. Now, morbific means disease causing. So the agent that causes vital force derangement has one basic property, and that is, it is inimical to life. What this means is that if left on its own and not countered by any constructive force, the morbific agents will cause degeneration and death of a living organism. And how do these morbific agents affect our vital force? If vital force is only energy, then it can only be influenced by something that is dynamic, something that is also energy. Hahnemann also states that these morbific agents exert a dynamic influence on the vital force. In the footnote of this aphorism, he has explained very clearly what he means by dynamic. Hahnemann gives the example of the force between earth and moon that makes the moon go round the earth. He also gives the examples of tides in sea coming in because of the dynamic effect of the moon on the water and the dynamic effect of a magnet on iron nails. Dynamic to him was energy that cannot be seen by eyes, but whose effect could be perceived through senses. Vital force was nothing more than such energy to Hahnemann. But Hahnemann did make a mistake in this footnote. He wrote, the steel needle becomes itself magnetic, even at a distance when the magnet does not touch it, and magnetizes other steel needles with the same magnetic property with which it had been endowed previously by the magnetic rod, just as a child with smallpox, please take note of this, just as a child with smallpox or measles communicates to a near untouched healthy child in an invisible manner, that is dynamically, the smallpox or measles that is infects it at a distance without anything material from the infective child going or capable of going to the one to be infected. A purely specific conceptual influence communicated to the near child's smallpox or measles in the same way as the magnet communicated to the near needle the magnetic property. Now to him the effect of the smallpox and measles infection was just like the effect of a magnet. something that definitely happened but could not be seen with the eyes. I wouldn't blame Hahnemann for making such a mistake. He had no way to know about the full theory of microbes and to see them. He could only see their effect and remark clearly that a child with measles only spreads measles and not smallpox, and vice versa. But this footnote brings an interesting twist to the whole theory of vital force and the dynamic cause of all disease. Hahnemann had said that the vital force is dynamic and it is affected by the dynamic influence of morbific agents. And he also believes that the infection was a dynamic event. He specially mentioned smallpox and measles. Today, we know that infections that he was talking about are not dynamic. They do have a material morbific nature. So is the whole theory of this vital force being dynamic and the disease being dynamic wrong? No. You have to understand that Hahnemann primarily relied on his observations to make conclusions. The facts about the invisible contagion seem to fit nicely with his dynamic concept of life and disease. So what do we do now? Throw the microbes in the dustbin or the theory of the vital force? Neither. While Hahnemann did make this mistake due to the limits of his power of observation, he knew the difference between the dynamic and the material cause of disease well. If you read the Organon and chronic diseases carefully, you will realize that he did make a distinction between the primary cause of the disease and the secondary cause of the disease. The factors that derange the vital force are the primary cause of the disease, and the infectious agents like bacteria and viruses are usually, but not always, the secondary cause of disease, which become active only if the vital force is deranged enough. We will discuss this further some other time. Now, what happens when the morbific agent succeeds in deranging the vital force? Hahnemann says, it is only the vital force deranged to such an abnormal state that can furnish the organism with its disagreeable sensations and incline it to the irregular processes which we call disease. Many philosophers call the derangement of the vital force the disease. But Hahnemann has clearly stated that the derangement of the vital force per se is not disease. He says that when the vital force is deranged, the body experiences disagreeable sensations and is inclined to irregular processes, which we call disease. Speaking in modern terms, when the vital force is deranged, the normal physiology of the body is disturbed and the body tends to develop abnormal physiology, which results in pathology. So the derangement of the vital force is just the first step towards disease. It is followed by disturbed physiology and then the pathology follows. Now, how do we know if our vital force is deranged? Hahnemann says that since vital force is dynamic in nature, its disturbance can only become apparent when the normal physiology gets disturbed, resulting in abnormal sensations and functions. So you have to find out the abnormal sensations and functions to find out the derangement of the vital force. The abnormal sensations can be sensed by the patient and the physician. But how do you find out the abnormal functions? They will manifest themselves as symptoms that can be observed and sensed. I'll place a little caveat here. Hahnemann says that the derangement of the vital force only makes itself known by the manifestation of disease in the sensations and functions of those parts of the organism exposed to the senses of the observer and the physician. Please note these words: exposed to the physician, exposed to the senses of the observer and physician. In Hahnemann's time, it would mean taking note of signs and symptoms that could be seen through eyes or perceived through external physical examination. Today, what a physician can sense is much more than what he could 200 years ago. Much more of a human body and its functioning is exposed to human senses directly or indirectly. Be it a simple stethoscope, an otoscope, colonoscope, bronchoscope, X-ray, USG, CT, PT, and MRI scans, or biochemical tests, our ability to sense a change in our body has increased many-folds. Many disease pathologies are today discovered accidentally, even before the patient feels any significant change in his or her health. So if you are a homeopath, I would urge you not to hesitate in using these extended sensory tools to find out what is wrong with your patient. The knowledge of pathology is as important as any other mental or emotional symptom. These tools do not belong to orthodox medicine alone. They are diagnostic tools that can be used by anyone who knows how to make sense of them. So if these modern tools add to our knowledge of or help us finding the abnormal functions, we should use them whenever they can help in diagnosing and managing the case. I'll also add a warning here. Many conventional doctors tend to order unnecessary tests, sometimes to escape the responsibility of making a clinical diagnosis, and sometimes to increase the kickback that they get from private diagnostic labs. Homeopaths should not fall into this trap. Use these tools judiciously and only for the benefit of the patient. Now, before I move on to the next aphorism, I'll explain a few more things. Earlier, I told you that I would tell you why Hahnemann wrote that the vital force is present everywhere in the body. The answer lies in aphorism 13, where he says, "Therefore disease considered, as it is by the allopathists, as a thing separate from the living whole, from the organism and its animating vital force, and hidden in the interior, be it ever so subtle a character, is an absurdity." In an earlier lecture, I had told you that during the time of Hahnemann, the medical field was rife with fancy hypotheses regarding the cause of disease. There were many materialistic theories attributing all diseases to specific organs or functions. Hahnemann says in Aphorism 13 that most physicians of his time were trying to find the cause of disease hidden in the interior of the organism. Hahnemann says that they will never find it anywhere within the body because the real cause is the derangement of the vital force, a dynamic event that cannot be seen. It can only be experienced through changes in sensations and functions. And the vital force is present everywhere in the body. It's not localized. Also, one more thing that I would like to bring your attention towards. In the first footnote to Aphorism 11, Hahnemann referred to the disease-causing dynamic influence as materia peccans. You should know that it is an old Latin phrase which was even used by Galen. It literally means sick-making substance or influence. Hahnemann has referred here to it just as a synonym for the morbific agent having dynamic influence over the vital force. Now let us move on to Aphorism 12, in which Hahnemann says, "It is the morbidly affected vital force alone that produces disease, so that the morbid phenomena, perceptible by our senses, express at the same time all the internal change, that is to say, the whole morbid derangement of the internal dynamics. In a word, they reveal the whole disease. Consequently, also the disappearance under treatment of all the morbid phenomena and of all the morbid alterations that differ from the healthy vital operations certainly affects and necessarily implies the restoration of the integrity of the vital force and therefore the recovered health of the whole organism." Now in this aphorism, Hahnemann reinforces the fact that it is the derangement of the vital force alone that produces disease. He further says that the derangement of the vital force that leads to the disease is fully exposed to our senses through signs and symptoms. Also, if all the morbid changes which are related to the disease from the body are removed under treatment, it indicates that the integrity of the vital force and the health is restored. If we understand this in modern terms, we can say that during homeopathic treatment, if all the morbid alterations, mind it, I am saying that morbid alterations, not just perceptible signs and symptoms, If all the morbid alterations are removed, the health of a person is restored completely. This is logical also, because unless the harmony of the body and the vital force is restored, the physiology will never revert to normal and the pathology will never disappear. The reason why Hahnemann has said that the health is completely restored after removal of all the perceptible signs and symptoms is that some of his detractors, like Hufelin, had challenged him that while the symptoms may disappear with homeopathic remedies, the disease remains within the body. This paragraph, along with aphorism 8, was an answer to such people who doubted the restoration of health with homeopathic treatment. In the footnote to aphorism 12, Hahnemann says that it is of no use for the physician to know exactly how the vital force is deranged. Here he means the mechanism, not the cause, and how it leads to the development of various diseases. What he needs to know about the morbid alterations is revealed to him in the form of perceptible changes. The rest will probably always remain concealed from him. Hahnemann was very far-sighted in making this statement. His work depended on practical observations. He knew that his medicines and principles worked, but there was no way to find out the internal dynamics of the human organism at that time. Providing better treatment to everyone through homeopathy was a much bigger priority than trying to find answers to all the how and why behind homeopathy. He wanted physicians to focus on curing the sick and not indulge in futile speculations. And he was successful in keeping the focus of the homeopathic community on clinical practice through his timely guidelines. The survival and growth of homeopathy has largely depended on this focus on clinical practice. More than anyone else, homeopaths know that the proof of the pudding lies in its eating. Today, after more than 200 years since he wrote these words, human beings have still not been able to understand all the complexity in our body. While a lot is known, a lot more is still unknown to us. And whatever is known is still on the material plane. The understanding of living organisms as energy entities and of the energy dynamics within each body is still very limited. But today there is a need to understand how our body works as an energy system, how it is deranged, and how it causes diseases, what happens during dynamization, and how our remedies affect our bodies. The material world will not be satisfied till we get these answers. Moreover, the physics of today is at a level where we can hope of getting these answers in the not so distant future. Let us keep our hopes alive for that day. Now, Hahnemann takes these thoughts forward in aphorisms 13, 14 and 15. In aphorism 13, he says that the disease is not an entity hidden somewhere in the interior of the human organism, as is believed by the allopaths who have a materialistic approach to life. The material concepts about disease have led to the development of the current medical system with all its vagaries and harmful treatment. Remember, these were Hahnemann's thoughts for the medical system of his time, which relied on strange practices like bloodletting and fancy theories. The orthodox medicine has progressed a lot in the last 2 centuries. Some of the development is positive, but the underlying philosophy and the approach to life and disease has remained more or less the same to this day. The orthodox system is now not as crude as it was during Hahnemann's time. It is more refined, polished, a more potent palliator, and more wrapped in a scientific veil. But under that polished and scientific appearance, the fundamentals are still the same. We'll leave this topic for some other day. For now, let's come back to aphorism 14. In aphorism 14, he reiterates that there is nothing in a body that is diseased and will not make itself known through signs and symptoms. Whatever might be the changes in the invisible interior of the body, they do reflect on the surface as perceptible signs and symptoms. But he adds a qualification here, to an exactly observing physician. That means the perceptible signs and symptoms will be visible only to an exactly observing physician. It means to understand and appreciate all the fine changes that are brought upon by the disease process, one needs a person who knows what to look for and is a keen observer. In the 15th aphorism, Hahnemann says that the internally deranged vital force and the outwardly reflected signs and symptoms are not separate from each other. They are one and the same. One is on the dynamic plane and the other on the material plane. Just like the material body and the vital force are not separate from each other. The material body cannot be imagined without the life force, and similarly, the vital force can have no existence without this material instrument. The two form a unity. It is only to improve our comprehension of the two that we study them separately. But they are a part of a single unit and cannot be separated from each other. Likewise, the deranged vital force and its material manifestations are not separate phenomena that need separate treatment. If you restore one, the other is restored too. So this covers a basic understanding of the role of vital force in disease, how the vital force is deranged, and how the disease develops, how it manifests in the form of signs and symptoms. Now let us try to understand this disease process as a thermodynamic phenomena. In the last lecture, I told you that the second law of thermodynamics does not support the evolution of complex thermodynamic systems like living organisms because it needs a lot of energy or work to sustain such systems. The living systems have low entropy. If you remember that entropy is a measure of disorder, the more complex and ordered a system, the lower is the entropy. So the living systems have low entropy and high Gibbs free energy. All thermodynamic systems tend to attain a state of lowest Gibbs free energy and high entropy. The human body is an open thermodynamic system. It is a complex and orderly system, so it has low entropy and high Gibbs free energy. Without the inflow of energy, which is through food, the system will follow the second law of thermodynamics and will try to become more simple and in this process more disorderly, resulting in high entropy and low Gibbs free energy. Now let us try to understand the disease process in terms of thermodynamics. Hahnemann said that since vital force is dynamic in nature, it can only be influenced by the dynamic influence of a morbific agent that is inimical to life. So first we have to understand what is inimical to life. Any force that disturbs or disrupts the fine equilibrium of this complex thermodynamic system can prove to be inimical to life. It can be a variation in temperature or humidity, a decrease in input of energy to the system, or increase in energy loss by any means. Basically, any physical, mental, emotional, or telluric, that is atmospheric stress, can result in disturbance of the equilibrium of this thermodynamic system. So what happens when the system is disturbed? The living organisms are evolved enough to perceive this change. Remember the lecture about the biological purpose of our existence? If not, I would urge you to go back to the last lecture. Since fulfilling the biological purpose of our existence is a priority for all living creatures, they try to correct the thermodynamic influence imbalance through the reserves they have. If the system, that is the vital force, succeeds in restoring the thermodynamic imbalance, nothing will happen. All will remain well. If the disturbance is very great, the system disrupts and the life is lost. If the disturbance to the thermodynamic system is not small enough to correct itself and not great enough to create loss of life, the system starts working in a compensated state, a state in which the normal physiology is disturbed. The altered physiology results in abnormal sensations and functions. Sometimes the physiology is altered so much that it gives rise to pathology itself. At other times, the weakened system creates an environment within the body that aids the growth of secondary causes of disease like bacteria and viruses, whose action on the body results in further damage to the system, resulting in nosological disease entities. So this is a very broad view of how our body works as a thermodynamic system and how it is affected by energy changes and how that leads to the development of physical diseases. This brings us to the end of this lecture. Do send me your feedback, and we'll meet next time to discuss the role of vital force in restoration of health. Till then, adieu.